We'll be starting the session in just a moment. If you have any connection or technical issues, try refreshing your browser first. If this doesn't work, please go to the Help Desk by clicking Sessions on the left, or click the Attendee tab on the right and search Help Desk to send a private message. Thank you for joining us.
Hello and welcome back, everyone, from the networking session. I hope you found that fruitful and you met a few new contacts along the way. My name is Siobhan Hansen. I'm responsible for food choice architecture and nutrition on the food team at Google. In addition to my role at Google, I'm pleased to serve as the vice chair of the Menus of Change Business Leadership Council. And in this capacity, I want to add a heartfelt welcome to everyone who's joining us for the summit this week. For our next session, we will focus on plants, protein, and the mind of the consumer as we look past the pandemic. And we'll take up among the most important, complicated, and challenging, but very interesting shifts we need to make in our collective food choices. As I can attest to in my role at Google, as well as with the Business Leadership Council, there is so much to unpack beyond matters of taste. So let's get started. I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, Sophie Egan. Sophie is the founder of Full Table Solutions, Director of Strategy for the Food for Climate League, and co-chair of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. Take it away, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Siobhan, and I echo that heartfelt welcome to everyone joining for this year's summit. It's such an exciting time in many areas related to healthy, sustainable, delicious food choices, but especially plant-forward. In this session, you are in for a real treat as we hear highlights from the hot off the press, just released Datassential Plant Forward Opportunity Report for 2021. This is a collaboration with the CIA as well as the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, and it's full of fascinating insights that really build upon the report from last year, while also probing further into consumer beliefs, attitudes, and aspirations that underlie these long-term trends. So you're going to hear from the perspective of consumer insights, operator insights, nutrition science, and all under the umbrella as well of how best to advance this, including the power of words and narrative. So our first speaker is no stranger to many of you. It's a real honor to welcome Jack Lee, President of Datassential. Jack, over to you.
Hey, Sophie. Thanks so much. I'm going to share my screen up, but in the meantime, that was an amazing intro. You had described this new report probably better than I could myself. I was thinking, how do I describe this? And I think you actually just nailed it. But in a nutshell, this is brand new research that Datassential did in collaboration with CIA and the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. I'm going to share some of the things that we learned. And as Sophie just said, it is all about how consumers think and behave around plant-forward options that may exist in their lives and on the menu. Not just what their behavior is, but the way they perceive these types of things. And the storyline to us is actually fairly clear. So we're just going to hop right into it. Let's take a look at what people actually eat on a either daily basis, or maybe they have it, a few times a week, or maybe they eat that thing a few times a month, or maybe they just don't have it really at all. And you can see the numbers for various traditional animal-based protein categories in sort of those red columns on the left. And on the right in green, you see more of those plant-based and plant-forward options. And basically, if you're talking about the traditional things that we've always sort of had in our lives that come from plants, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts and legumes and beans, these things already are consumed quite regularly, and in fact, more often than many of the traditional animal protein categories. But as we move into some of these newer things that are, relatively newer, speaking to consumers, other types of plant proteins, plant-based meat or egg substitutes, or non-dairy substitutes, those numbers become quite a bit lower. But as a matter of context and understand how we sort of elevate all of this, it is sort of helpful to look at what people's approach to eating actually is. So this is a set of two questions. We're going to look at how people eat today and how they aspire to eat tomorrow, with tomorrow being sort of a figurative, if you could change your behavior overnight, what would it look like type of a thing. So here's what it looks like today, right? So this is a classify yourself into one of these buckets, if you will. Are you a full-fledged meat eater that you eat meat with, no restriction whatsoever? You don't think about limiting meat in any sort of way, full unabashed meat eater. Are you a flexitarian? Are you a vegetarian, a vegan? Do you just eat chicken? Do you just eat fish? And here are the numbers. So about 69% of Americans classify themselves as a full-fledged meat eater today. But if you ask, hey, how would you like to eat tomorrow? Here's what the numbers look like. And you can see they point in a very, very clear direction. That percentage of folks that say, hey, I want to be full-time meat eater and eat meat without restriction is down 16 points, right? From 69 to 53% aspirationally. And you see gains in the vegan population, the vegetarian population, even the pescatarian population. The chicken-only people, not so much. But you also see a particular size gain in the flexitarian population from 14 today to 22 tomorrow. And that to us really is the low-hanging fruit. And we're going to talk about why this is sort of that first place that we go as we drive plant forward. But that the game doesn't really just stop there, because if you look at size of opportunity, yes, you have a whole bunch of people that want to be flexitarian that are not yet today, and they want to grow into that behavior. But that number is still greatly dwarfed by the percentage of people that say, you know what, I'm still a meat eater. And are there solutions that we can offer to them that would be equally compelling and get them onto the plant forward train? So the numbers are quite staggering, right? If you just straight up ask people, do you want to eat more of the stuff or do you want to eat less of the stuff? I mean, it is really, really eye-popping. Everyone wants to eat more plant-based foods. If you ask them, do you want more plant-based foods? 58% of consumers say I want to increase my intake of plant-based foods versus just 4% that say I want to decrease it. I would question who those 4% of people are, but there are some. Look at how staggering that is, right? And compare it to some of the other categories here where, yes, you have people that say they want to have more seafood, compared to those that say they want to have less. By the time you get to something like red meat, right there, you have a preponderance of people saying they'd rather decrease that than increase it from where they are in their diet today. But that plant-based line is really quite remarkable. So the raw intent is there. If people could just eat the way they say they want to eat, we would already be there. So it's not so much a question of intent, although there's certainly things we could do with education and messaging that we'll talk about. But the core intent to increase plant-based consumption is there. The problem is, as people make food choices in their lives, or when they're sitting down at a restaurant and ordering at a menu board, there's a lot of stuff that competes with that plant-based option. Look, if you asked people, hey, would you like to eat healthier compared to the way you eat today? Like 90% of people would say yes, but only a small portion of those 90% actually go on to enact that behavior. So the question is not so much one of building intent, because the intent is there. The question is, how do you activate that intent in a world where there are many, many other competing things? I'm a guilty party. I'll tell you, probably 30 minutes before we started, I had some Indian food delivered, and yeah, I had, there was a vegetable dish in there, the aloo gobi, but I also had a chicken tikka masala because that was the thing that sounded best on the menu to me at the time. And I knew I was about to do a plant-based, plant-forward presentation in 30 minutes, and I still had it. So the intent is there, but there's a lot that's competing with that intent, and we're going to talk about ways we can maybe address that. So as far as plant-forward eating goes, about half the about 44% of the population sort of understands the concept of what that is. The number is higher among millennials. And this is not particularly surprising to us. So it turns out that millennials are actually the most food-forward generation. Gen Xers were more food-forward than boomers. Millennials were more food-forward than Gen Xers. And you might think that Gen Zers are more food-forward than millennials, but the data actually consistently shows that not to be true. The most food-forward generation actually are millennials, and you actually have a decline after that as we go into Gen Z. So if we're looking for initial targets that could be influencers and help get the word out, that millennial audience is there. It's waiting. It is the one that is most on board the plant-forward train already, and they have a lot of social clout, that we can leverage. So take a look at some of the statements that we have here. I'm going to read them out to you one at a time, because the font might get a little bit small. I don't know. So I'm open to trying more dishes that mix animal and plant proteins together. Half of consumers say they agree with this. They like the idea, but the number is 65% among millennials. I am open to trying more dishes that feature dairy alternatives, whether it's vegan cheese or nut milk. 47% of consumers overall agree. The number is much higher at 66% of millennials. I prefer dairy alternatives to animal-based dairy. Again, a big gap in favor of millennials from 37 to 51%. So if we want to focus our messaging efforts, the millennial audience would be a great audience to begin with. This chart requires a little bit of deciphering, so I'm going to read out the options over here so we are all looking at the same thing. The dark green on the left are people that say, hey, I prefer plant-based meat substitutes over other sorts of just generally plant-forward choices, over all those choices that are not strictly substituting meat with a plant-based option. That lighter shade green, these are people that say, I prefer those plant-forward choices, not just the meat substitutes, right? So basically the flip side of that. The white are the people that say, hey, I like these things equally. And the orange are just the absolute rejectors that say, you know what, this whole notion of plant-based meat substitutes, not for me. So the things I would look at first is how long are the stems in each one of these groups, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, boomers, that are not the orange part of the stem, right? Because the orange part, those are the rejectors. And as you can see, it is millennials that are most open to this notion of plant-based meat substitutes, whether they prefer more to other plant-forward choices or equally to it or less, they're at least open to it in some way. And again, that would be the first audience I would go after. You then have a choice, right, of either Gen Z or Gen Xers that are roughly equally on board, but boomers are going to be a much, much tougher sell. Those might be the last folks to come on board. But as plant-forward options and plant-based meat substitutes become more ubiquitous, that may help them get there. But I probably wouldn't start with really going after boomers because they are the most resistant today. So there are some things we probably need to do around messaging, right? The notion of plant-based protein being a more sustainable source of protein than animal-based protein. It seems that people that have looked at the topic or are likely to maybe, read publications or watch news that may talk about this tend to be more likely to agree with this statement. About 46% of general population says, yeah, I think plant-based protein is more sustainable. The number shoots up to nearly 60% of millennials, of high-income households, as well as of students. So there are certain parts of the population that are particularly attuned to this, and we want to leverage those folks as potential sources of word of mouth and allow them to influence their friends, colleagues, peers, family, etc. But there are some things that we have to contend with at the same time. So these are a number of statements around plant-based protein and their animal-based counterparts. And you can see a couple of things that are real challenges for plant-based, right? 62% say they agree that that they prefer animal-based protein over plant-based protein. 61% say they prefer the taste of animal-based protein over plant-based protein, or that, and 56% say they think animal-based dairy tastes better than plant-based dairy. So people want to increase their consumption of plant-based, but it doesn't quite ring the same bell that animal-based protein does in a lot of cases. And I think this is the thing that we need to work with. I'll go back to my lunch example. I probably could have ordered an all plant-based lunch. I didn't. I'm a consumer, and something else that wasn't plant-based actually just sounded good to me. And that's the option that I went with. What would have dissuaded me from doing that? What would have discouraged me from doing that and encouraged me to go all plant-based? Well, it's really all about the dishes themselves, right? So here we asked, what is most satiating to you, right? Do you think that these things are going to fill you up? People feel that land-based proteins, land animal proteins, have high satiety, but you go all the way down to the bottom of this list, and you can see that plant-based meat proteins are least thought to give you satiety. That's an issue, but it doesn't have to be, right? Because this is an issue if the consumer thinks of these things as just the proteins themselves. But is that really how you think of food? If I have a burger, I'm having a burger regardless of what's in between that bun, right? So it's really a framing type of thing where instead of focusing specifically on, hey, this particular thing that's a piece of protein is going to either fill you up or not, it's the dish overall that actually matters to the consumer. And I think that's what we need to get behind, because we don't want to make people feel like they're making any compromises at all going with a plant-based route, right? We want them to say, hey, I'm getting all the taste, all the flavor, all the satiety, and all the things that I want out of this. And the easiest way to do that is to orient around the dish itself rather than just that particular piece of protein. Look at the things that consumers say that they are concerns to them about eating less meat in restaurants and having more vegetables, whole grains and other plant-based foods. Number one, not being satisfied with the taste of the meal. Two, that I might be paying too much for vegetables and other plant-based ingredients as opposed to getting, good value when I'm paying for a piece of meat. That I might be hungry a couple of hours later, that I'm not getting enough protein. Again, these are all things that are, I think, well solved if we focus on the dish and not just the protein that's in that dish. So this is largely a menu positioning thing in my mind. It also helps defeat that fear that consumers have that they're compromising or giving something up, right? Don't remind them about what they're not getting. Remind them about all the great stuff they are getting, which is that entire burger or whatever it may be. And, remember, the competition piece is real. So here's just a snapshot of just some of the recent items that have popped up on menus. We track this in a system of ours called Scores, where we actually get consumer feedback on everything that launches on chain restaurant menus. Do they like it? Do they want to order it? Do they think it's unique, etc.? If you're going into a restaurant and you were maybe thinking of going plant-based, if that thought was already in your head, and all of a sudden you're hit with the menu, and let's say you think you're a flexitarian mindset, there's a whole lot of competition of really yummy looking stuff that you're going to compete with. And again, if all we do is say to the consumer, hey, eat more plant-based, it's really, really hard to overcome this competition. We just need dishes themselves that are more appealing than their meat-based counterparts. So I would think, you want to remember that no one makes a menu decision in absolute isolation. It is always within the context of other options that are available. And there's a lot of yummy options on menus these days. So if we think about what the future of plant-based eating looks like, most consumers are familiar with the idea right now. Most of them are actually familiar with the term plant-based as well, those actual words. And we saw that many consumers say, I want to have more plant-based options in my diet. You just have to show me the right ones to make me actually do it. And there's a lot of really interesting things, right? Here's a collard greens milk, right? If I had this sandwich, I wouldn't feel like I'm compromising on a thing. Looks like it's going to fill me up. Looks like it's ultra delicious. I don't know if it's particularly healthy, who knows, but it doesn't make me feel like I'm compromising. Or I think we heard early on in chat, that jackfruit is a great option. It's up like 60% on menus. Oh, am I almost out of time? Am I out of time?
We are at time, just as you're getting into the jackfruit details.
It's a good place to stop. I'll put some thoughts in chat. And Sophie, I guess I'm going to kick it back to you so we stay on schedule.
Well, thank you, Jack. And obviously there is so much more to dig into in that report. And this was such a great teaser. Datassential, of course, is just a treasure trove of data, of course. But Jack, really you have, and your colleagues at Datassential have such an amazing ability to really draw out a story that we can help, that can help us make sense of the data that you're seeing. So lots more to dig into there, and a breakout session later on as well. So now we're going to turn over to the nutrition science side of this, and really speaks to some of this aspiration, intention, action disconnect that we see, and also some of these misconceptions around topics such as satiety, quality and quantity of protein. So there's really no one better, excuse me, no one better to talk about this than the MOC fan favorite, Dr. Christopher Gardner. He's professor of medicine at Stanford and director of nutrition studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center. He is also a founding visionary behind the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative and a dear colleague. So Christopher, over to you.
Thanks, Sophie. And that was so great. Jack set me up so well. I am so envious of all your data. Oh my gosh. Okay. So really happy to be here, part of this, really anxious to hear Eve after this. I'm the geeky nerd guy who has lots of data, and I've given this before. I'm going to try to do a 6-minute version of what's usually a 45-minute talk and then expand what is my typical protein rant. This is the question I get all the time as a nutrition scientist. Oh my God, if I have less animal protein, where am I going to get it from? And so after many years of participating with Menus of Change, I wrote this article and published this in 2019 with a bunch of colleagues. So the main points were people need, according to nutrition science, about 50 grams of protein a day. They eat about 100 grams of protein a day, which is way more than they need. And there's plenty of room to cut back somewhat on protein. And if you did that, you'd actually help human health and the health of the planet. So here's my quick run through of that. Of a bunch of topics in nutrition, one of them being protein. So that's only a couple hundred pages and you really don't want to read them. So take my word for it. Something called the estimated average requirement in nutrition shows that some people need very little protein, some people need more. The average is somewhere around here. And what we recommend for the public is not the average. If everybody got the average, half the population would be deficient. So we put this safety buffer in when we make a national recommendation. I hope that makes sense. And here's actually the numbers that you'd get if you use the EAR or the RDA. It's in grams per kilogram body weight. I translated it into pounds for you. If you want to extrapolate, see how heavy you are, this is what you probably require. This is with a safety buffer. And according to other data, this is how much Americans eat, which is about twice the EAR or the RDA. Stop obsessing with protein. When you get more than you need, there's actually no place to store it. You can store enough carbs for a day or two and fat forever, but there isn't a storage place for protein. So as soon as you've met all your needs, you actually convert it within a day or so to carbs or fat. You have to get rid of nitrogen and turn it into ammonia, eliminate that in your kidney. And then even though people will admit that there's plenty of protein in our diets if we had less, if we did switch to plant versus animal, wait a sec, aren't those plant proteins missing amino acids? Okay, I know this is way too complicated and I don't have time to go into it, but this is sort of a distribution of 20 amino acids, essential and non-essential, across all the major food groups. And the take home from this is supposed to be that if you look up and down, the distribution of amino acids is really similar in plants, all these ones on the bottom, and animal at the top. Yes, animal foods have more protein per calorie, but we already get plenty of protein, so you shouldn't have to worry too much. And so one of the things I try to point to is a Scrabble game where it's not that you might need 40 grams of protein and there's 20 amino acids and you need 2 of each amino acid. No, you need more of some amino acids and some less, just like Scrabble. Okay, and so in a normal Scrabble game, let's say you got a bag of 100 letters, pretend that's 40 grams of protein. Okay, and so you make all the words you can. What if you got 2 bags of Scrabble letters. Where the hell would you put the other letters? You know, did you ever have a bingo at the end of a game of Scrabble and say, there's no room to put the bingo? Oh, damn it. Okay, well, that's like getting all that extra protein at the end of the day. And maybe you lost some letters. Maybe you lost an L and an M deficit with the other bag. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Okay, so here we go. We put this together and made some pictures of food and how much protein there was. 90 grams of protein, 67.5 grams of protein, almost all animal, a little plant, more plant, and a little less animal. So we put these 3 shifts together. For my 6-minute overview here, I'm just going to focus on this one here and say, okay, here's about what Americans get, 90 grams of protein, let's say. Okay, and so they get it from grains and beans and nuts, but Americans don't eat many beans and nuts. They eat a lot of grains. There's not all that much protein in grains. So they're getting most of their protein from dairy and eggs and meat. And this isn't supposed to be a breakfast plate just because there's eggs on it. This is just an example of how could you get 90 grams of protein? And how many calories would this be? It would actually only be 800 calories. You're all eating 2,000, 2,500, maybe 3,000 calories a day. And remember, I showed you that heat map of amino acids. Everything has protein. So by the time you got the other 1,200 or whatever extra calories, you get way more than 90 grams of protein. So what we did in this paper was said, look, you could easily cut back on your protein by 25%. And you could easily shift 25% of that from animal to plant. This is still actually more animal protein than plant protein. And this is roughly the same number of calories, but look how many beans and nuts I have now. I kept the grains the same because we eat plenty of grains. But I decreased the dairy and the eggs and the meat. Didn't make it vegan or vegetarian. And that 25-25 shift right there, just in terms of human health and environmental health, oh my God, you would exceed the RDA. You wouldn't have to worry about that plant protein because the quality is much higher than most people think. If you extrapolated that to the 300 million folks plus in the US, you would decrease gas emissions due to the food system quite substantially. Alone, my environmental colleague told me that would be 8% of the decrease pledged under the Paris Agreement just from that 25-25 shift. And we decrease water use by 10%. So this is a win-win for human health and for the environmental health. God knows there's room for us to cut back on meat. Here is the FAO's estimate of meat consumption in North America compared to the rest of the world. Isn't that practically obscene? So a group of us wrote a paper on, okay, we're going to define protein quality by the amount and distribution of amino acids. Or should we say, God, in the US, we get plenty of protein. Why don't we talk about the nutrients that come with the sources of protein? Let's look at the nutrients that come with meat and the nutrients that come with plants. And let's look at the environmental footprint. And if you want to talk about protein quality, let's not just talk about amino acids. Let's talk about other nutrients and protein quality. Okay, so that's my rant on protein. I tried to cut that back from 45 minutes to 6. I don't know how close I was to that. Pretty good. Okay, but let's talk about satiety. People are worried about satiety. I saw that in Jack's presentation. Okay, yes, people think, oh, I need more protein compared to the things that don't make me, where I'm still hungry. Okay, but this is like an American breakfast. This is not filling. Okay, I'm so not surprised. This is not filling. This is carb on carb on carb. Okay, is this less filling? Well, yes, just about anything would be less filling than that last thing. This would be more filling and more satiating right here. So make an omelet with some veggies in it, or have some steel-cut oats with some nuts in it. So the fat and the fiber would help fill you up. Here's a very cool protein paper by Barbara Rolls' group where she made these casseroles where she hid the amount of protein in them. So she had a whole bunch of normal weight women eat on various days, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30% energy and protein in these casseroles. And at the end of the day, they ate the same number of calories. The protein wasn't differentially filling. So fat has a couple reasons for being satiating. So include some fat in there, maybe some healthy plant fats. Yes, added sugar and white refined grain is not filling, but these other slow releasing carbs and high fiber sources are filling. So is satiety due to presence of protein, or is it some of these other things too? It's really all of them, okay? So for higher satiety, it's more than just protein. It's all those things I just showed you. And for performance, let's do this really quickly. Have you seen the Game Changers thing about physical performance? You don't have to be plant-based, but you can to be an elite athlete. And how about great brains? I found this in a list of great vegetarians. I see there's no women here, so I decided to look for some women. Oh, look at this. There's plenty of women and plenty of men who are super famous vegans, and even some politicians who are plant-based, okay? So chefs, we need you. We need you to make these things unapologetically delicious. And let's get out of the mindset that it's steak, Mediterranean salad, or boring rice and beans. No. There's 3 types of Mediterranean salad. You could have meat in it, just cheese, or vegan. Let me do that with a couple others. Shakshuka with meat, with just eggs, or vegan. How about tacos? Fish, cheese, or vegan? These are all concepts that you chefs can help us with. Oh, I depend on you. Think of your clientele as being in this range. We have some vegans, but some vegetarians, flexitarians, open-minded. Let's meet them where they are. So take-home messages is you're getting plenty of protein. Protein's not as uniquely satiating as people say. Whole foods will support athletic and brain performance. And chefs, we need you. Thanks, everybody. And Sophie, you're here to pull the cook on me. I'm out.
Thank you so much, Christopher. That was phenomenal, and really appreciate you setting the record straight on some of these myths. We're really excited now to dig into some discussion, so stay where you are, Christopher, and we're going to welcome into the discussion actually another voice. That's Eve Turow-Paul. She's author, journalist, and founder and executive director of Food for Climate League. I am proud to call her a dear colleague, as I also serve as director of strategy for Food for Climate League. And it's no coincidence that Food for Climate League and Menus of Change University Research Collaborative are collaborators, because we're really trying to work on these similar research questions. We are, of course, going to welcome back Jack, and especially anyone who had questions on his presentation. He is here for that as well. So I see a couple of questions coming in the chat, but I'm going to kick things off with Eve. Really want to focus here with a question for you about, we heard from the perspective of consumers and what the nutrition science tells us, but what role does narrative play in all of this? Where do you see the greatest pitfalls among food service companies when they're trying to effectively market either plant-based proteins or in general plant-forward menu options? And how might they better leverage the power of words and the right framing to ensure these options resonate with diners?
Well, thank you, Sophie, for including me on this panel, and Christopher and Jack, thank you for those wonderful presentations. I feel like we're getting a really great overview here of the amazing opportunity in plant-forward eating. And Sophie, as you were just suggesting, there is a really large role that narrative can play. So at Food for Climate League, we've been looking into the ways that the industry and nonprofits currently talk about food and climate topics, and really assessing what are the mistaken assumptions that are holding back this movement that's keeping sustainable eating niche instead of the norm. And as Jack presented, there are a lot of people who are interested in this way of eating. As Christopher just pointed out, there is a lot of culinary exploration to be had in this space. Yet, so many of us feel like we are being held back and kind of pigeonholed into a corner. A lot of that has to do with the framing. So one of the most basic findings that Food for Climate League had early on in our research is that so often plant-based meals are framed in the negative. And Jack was alluding to this as well, right? So often we read the menu description and it's all about what's not in the dish, so you don't really know what it is that you're eating. It's also oftentimes being framed as a meat dish that's now having a lot of elements being substituted, instead of just celebrating all of the plant-based dishes that there are out there in the world. Most of the world eats plant-forward already. There are so many different ways of eating that we can be celebrating. We should be focusing on flavor, on texture, on heritages, different traditions. Really, when you open your eyes to the culinary creativity that is available to us, it becomes more exciting. The other problem that a lot of us face is just exclusionary language, confusing language. It's often about simplifying and also not hitting people over the head with climate-related content. You need to know your audience. You need to know if that's going to resonate, or if sometimes it might be better to just talk about the amazing food you're going to prepare and leave the sustainability context out of it altogether.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Eve. You know, Jack, I want to get your take on this, because Eve is really pointing to the role of food service operators, right? When we're talking about we and culinary creativity, that's the audience we have here today. So I know that you have at Datassential, you really have your ear to the ground, not only with diners or consumers, but with operators. So what do you see as the biggest gap between what's offered and what's desired when it comes to plant-forward menus? Are there maybe specific foods or dishes that you think eaters truly want, but no one's serving enough of? Foods or dishes that conversely they don't really love, but that operators are serving too much of? Can you offer our audience kind of a recommendation for bridging some of this gap? And maybe it's not even the menu engineering or menu design, but simply how they're talking about it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I think Eve said it so incredibly well, which is operators need help with how they should be describing their dishes to the consumer. Right. Look, the bottom line is people like meat, right? Steak is one of the most loved things in America. So why would you say, hey, look at this dish, it doesn't have steak in it? Why even call that out? Right. Focus on all the good stuff that's there. And so that's number one, right? Don't call out the stuff that's not there. The second thing is pictures are actually enormously helpful. If someone, Christopher did that brilliantly in his presentation. I want to eat all that stuff. I may not have wanted it if you just read me the words, but once you show me the picture, I'm like, oh, that looks pretty amazing. And we could do this now in a way that we didn't in the past, because one of the things the pandemic did is it shifted a lot of people to looking at menus online and whatnot, which is a great place to have pictures, right? It's not just the Chinese menu that has a picture for every dish. We can do that for every menu now. Instead, we should all be getting behind that, because we do eat with our eyes. But being able to describe things better and position it is a huge, huge help. And then obviously all the chefs that are attending here, you're going to come up with the delicious applications, but make sure they're presented in a way that really show off how amazing those things are.
Yeah, that's such a great point, that we really need to use all of the communication tools at our disposal, right? Including the visual ones. Yep. So Christopher, kind of over to you as a different gap that you started to get to, but where is the biggest gap between the science and the consumer psyche? So if we were to collectively channel all this fantastic food, fantastic menus, fantastic communication efforts, where do we need to focus, right? With where the needs, preferences, perceptions, and concerns about protein are just, there's too much of a misunderstanding or of a disconnect. Maybe something that either Jack or Eve could tackle in the name of advancing plant-forward eating?
I don't know. This is just a perfect complementary group for me, Sophie, because for those of you who don't know, a long time ago, I just wanted to have a vegetarian restaurant. And by mistake, I got this professor position in NIH funds. And I've been feeding and bleeding thousands of people. And I publish in major medical journals. And I say, see, science shows. And they say, okay, wait, I got to get another order of a burger and fries before I listen to you. What was that you're saying? I say, God, I've got statistics, I've got bar graphs, I can show you amino acid distributions. Aren't you guys on the edge of your chair? No, because Jack and Eve are doing the communication. Jack's data is so much sexier than mine, although mine took a lot longer to gather. He went into these surveys. So Jack, I'm pissed that you can do these quick surveys, but they're very powerful. I really think they're powerful. And the narrative that Eve has is powerful. So actually, personally, I've been shifting my whole career in their direction because I feel like I can support them. The science is there. It's really strong, but I can't convey the message without both Jack's style of data presentation and Eve's arc of that narrative. So thrilled to be here with this particular audience, which are the game changers in the food world right now.
Yeah, I love that, Christopher. There's really such a role for so many different stakeholders to play in this, so we have to work collectively. A couple of questions from the audience for you, Christopher, while I have you. Two about kind of, again, this whole protein conundrum.
Uh-oh.
The audience member says, love the Scrabble analogy, Christopher. Did we lose you, Christopher?
We did. So yeah, I didn't hear you. If you asked a question, I didn't hear. I heard Scrabble analogy. Love the Scrabble analogy.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the question was if the needs in amino acids differ by population, like the French Scrabbles have different letters, for example.
Ah, that is fascinating. Yeah, there actually are different Scrabble boards, but they're mostly the same. And no, if you go to amino acids, they're the same for everyone.
Okay, great. And this is going to be rapid fire because we've got 4 minutes left. The other question is, can you recommend a reference to antagonize the argument that animal proteins are superior? So,
my article, yes, my article, 2019. I spent years on that, seriously. The two that I referenced in this talk, and I write cgardner@stanford.edu. I would be happy to send you. And they're actually, I think they're written in pretty intelligible language. They're not really all that geeky. Please ask me for those.
Yes, we will send it out. And I think Eve and Jack can be the translators. They can help really amplify and translate this into something, a fourth grader can understand, and every person in between, maybe use some visuals. Eve, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, meat has been positioned through the industry as an elitist goal, right? It's a sign of success. And so what our responsibility is to create new dishes, new ways of eating that are the new sign of success that just happen to be sustainable, but that are gorgeous and delicious and drool-worthy and kind of encompass all of those different facets. And we can do that. We just need a strategy. And it sounds like, Christopher, you have the data to then inform the strategy.
Yeah. So I also want to acknowledge this question from the audience about the cost dimension. And this kind of relates to what you're saying, Eve, around status and perception, right? So the question is, plant-based dishes usually require more back-of-house work and skills. What can be a way to justify the true cost of food? And I'll open this up to whoever wants to jump in on that. Eve?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in on it.
Challenging one. I mean, what's the planet? Go ahead, Eve.
Okay, please, Eve, and then we're hearing from Christopher if we have time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a way to be positioning kind of the breadth of fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes for us to be consuming also on that socioeconomic spectrum. There are certain things that are available year round that are more ubiquitous. Then there are specialty ingredients that are going to be taking more time to prepare, that perhaps are heirloom varieties that are more unique to a certain location. And I do think that there can be that kind of experience scale, sophistication scale based on those things. I also think that, we believe that meat and other animal proteins are easy to cook because we have been trained to cook them. And I think that if we simply have a culture that is embedded deeply into the traditions of cooking rice and legumes and grains and all of those other things, it's not going to be such a heavy lift on the back of house side of things.
Yeah, thank you, Eve. And I can just echo too that, this is an area that's really heating up, the idea of true cost of food or real cost of food or true cost accounting. And, it's trying to bring to the surface the externalities. So not only on the culinary side of things, right, there's this question of skills and training, and CIA is doing so much on plant-forward training and how to ensure that they get that equal or higher treatment. But also just in bringing to light, where do those costs go when you have artificially low priced foods? And so I think, like you're saying, Eve, too, some of this is this dynamic of a culture shift, and some of it is actually more of like in a culture shift in culinary worlds and in food service. So one last question is, in 1 minute, we're gonna wrap. I'd like to know the panel's thoughts on sustainably raised meat and its inclusion in our diet versus no meat. I'm gonna let Christopher or Jack take this, and then we will wrap.
I will just say, from a consumer perspective, so I'm making no value judgment here. People do like the idea, but they don't see it messaged to them very often on a menu.
Yeah, got it. Christopher?
So what I love here is the protein flip that the CIA came up with. It's perfect. So have a bed of grains and beans and then put 2 ounces of sustainably raised meat on top of that. And you get the taste and you just don't get the bulk of the meat.
Yeah, it's really where things are heading, right? Less and better. That whole kind of consensus, I think, is really approachable. Well, I really want to thank the panel. We know that the audience has loved this dialogue. So pleased to know that you're interested and you have more questions. Please join us for a deeper dive into this topic for breakout session 8 roughly. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jackie, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Sophie, as well as Jack, Christopher, and Eve. That session was packed with insights, but if you feel like you didn't get a chance to capture it all, don't worry. We're posting all of the presentations as well as recordings of all of the sessions on the Summit Materials page of our website. The password was emailed to you earlier this week, and you can also find it by scrolling down below the stage video. We're also going to check in on our earlier poll question and results. But before we do that, let's take a look at the agenda for the rest of the day. We'll have a short program intermission for you to dash off a quick email or perhaps take a stroll around the block before our second block of programming. Whatever you do, make sure you come back right at 12:30 Pacific, 3:30 Eastern, because we'll be launching straight into the newest insights from research on phytochemicals and immunity and how we can leverage the latest nutrition science on our menus. So let's take a quick peek at those polls now. Let me just navigate over there to see what our poll, give me just a second as my computer catches up to me. But the poll question was, did the pandemic and events in the past year instigate changes within your business as it relates to healthier items, climate-friendly items, sustainability goals, or rethinking labor models? And it looks like actually most people are saying, about almost 50% are saying that the pandemic really brought about changes related to rethinking labor models. So that is awesome. We've also got a new poll up asking about immunity boosting foods on your menu. So be sure to check that out. And lastly, if you're looking to train and educate staff about implementing the Menus of Change principles in your operation, we encourage you to check out the Culinary Institute of America and Lobster Inc.'s new Plant Forward training and certification program. This online course will prepare cooks and chefs for the seismic shift towards plant-forward sustainable cooking. For more information, visit the Plant Forward Kitchen booth during our networking breaks. All right, we will see you in 30 minutes.